Imagine a country, right, where the citizens are pulling in over $25,000 a year per capita.
Yeah, which is a very solid number.
Exactly. And they basically run the regional financial system.
Hmm.
Plus, their high-value corporate workforce is overwhelmingly dominated by highly educated women.
Right, which goes against a lot of preconceived
It
notions.
really does.
Okay.
But then you take that exact same country and you factor in that their national savings account is technically bleeding into the red.
Yeah, just deeply in the negative.
And they have virtually zero natural fresh water. So welcome to the paradox of the Kingdom of Bahrain.
It really is a stunning set of contradictions. When you view a nation's economy from the outside, the stereotypes act like a blurry lens.
Yeah, you think you know exactly what you're looking at.
Right, but the structural bones beneath the surface tell a completely different story.
And that is exactly the blurry lens we are going to smash today. I want to welcome you, yes, you listening right now, to a deep dive into a fascinating, frankly, massive stack of data you sent our way.
It is a lot to unpack.
It really is. We are looking at the Comprehensive Development Research Report on the Kingdom of Bahrain, spanning all the way from 1960 to 2023.
Which gives us this incredible longitudinal view.
Yeah, it's a multidimensional data set.
Hmm.
It tracks economic transitions, human capital, and governance. And let me tell you, when most people think of Bahrain, or frankly any nation in the Gulf, the immediate mental image is, oil derricks.
Right, sprawling desert sands, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And an economy entirely tethered to fossil fuels.
Which, I mean, historically speaking, was the reality. They were a textbook resource-dependent economy.
Right.
But the data in this report maps out an economy that recognized the terminal limits of that model, like, decades ago.
So our mission today is to trace one of the most dramatic economic and social transitions of the last 60 years. We're going to map Bahrain's evolution from absolute resource dependence to a high-value, service-driven powerhouse.
And we aren't just going to list the wins here.
No, definitely not. We're going to look at the friction points. Because transitioning an entire society doesn't happen without extreme stress on the environment,
Oh, absolutely. The environment, the culture, the underlying infrastructure.
Yeah, the stress points are where the real story lives. So to unpack this 60-year data set, how are we breaking this down?
Well, we're going to look at the transition through 4 distinct lenses. We'll start with the macro economy, so where the wealth actually originates today.
Okay, makes sense.
Then we have to look at the extreme vulnerability of their trade model. From there, we'll dive into the human element.
The demographics, right?
Right, demographics and a gender revolution that basically defies almost every Western assumption about the region.
I am incredibly eager to get into that gender data.
It's wild. And finally, we'll look at the governance engine that keeps this entire precarious machine from flying apart.
Yeah, the governance stuff is fascinating. But before we get to who is doing the work, we really need to understand the scale of the operation.
Right, the macro view.
Exactly. Let's pull back to the 30,000-foot view. Where does Bahrain actually sit on the global financial spectrum today?
So if we look at the core macro indicators, Bahrain sits firmly and quite confidently, really, in the high-income bracket.
Okay.
The report tracks gross national income, or GNI, per capita. And what stands out immediately is just the resilience of that number.
How resilient are we talking?
For years, the GNI per capita, measured at 2015 constant prices, has remained rock solid above $20,000.
Wow.
And by 2023, their gross domestic product, so GDP per capita, reached around $25,120.
Okay, let's ground that constant prices term for a second, just to be absolutely clear for everyone.
Sure.
That means we are stripping away the illusion of inflation, correct?
Exactly.
So we aren't just looking at the price of things going up, we're looking at real, tangible purchasing power and economic output.
That is a crucial distinction, yeah. When you use constant prices, you aren't being fooled by currency fluctuations or, global inflation spikes.
Right, you're looking at the actual value.
You are seeing the actual physical volume of goods and services produced per person. So at over $25,000 per capita in real terms, Bahrain is operating in the upper echelons of global wealth.
But if you look at the timeline in the data, the trajectory hasn't been like a perfectly smooth upward curve, has it?
No, definitely not.
Because 2020 is a massive crater in the graph, the data shows a very sharp very visible dip.
Yeah, the 2020 global dip is unmistakable. I mean, the pandemic forced a global economic freeze, and every highly integrated nation felt it.
Right.
But the story isn't the dip, the story is the rebound.
Okay. What happened?
It wasn't just a recovery, it was a slingshot. The data shows that in 2021, Bahrain saw an absolute explosion in growth, hitting a 12.6% GNI growth spike.
Wait, 12.6% in a single year?
Yeah, a massive spike.
That is a wild number. I mean, you normally associate double-digit growth with an emerging, developing economy that is just starting to industrialize. Right?
Exactly, not an established high-income nation.
So what actually happened on the ground to trigger a 12.6% spike?
It really comes down to pent-up global demand and the agility of Bahrain's structural makeup.
Agility in what sense?
Well, when the global shipping lanes and financial systems turned back on, Bahrain was positioned to immediately capture that flowing capital.
Ah, I see.
They didn't have to restart massive, sluggish manufacturing bases. They just had to turn the digital spigots back on, essentially.
So it's a very different kind of economy.
Totally. And to understand how they manage that, we have to look at the structural pie chart of their economy. This is where the old stereotype of the oil state completely shatters.
Yeah, I'm looking at this GDP breakdown in the report, and if I didn't know the name of the country at the top of the page,
Yeah.
I would literally never guess this was a Gulf state.
Right. It's surprising.
Break this down for us.
So if you look at the value-added percentage of GDP, services completely dominate the landscape.
Okay.
They account for over 53.2% of the entire economy. More than half of all value generated in Bahrain comes from services.
That's huge.
Then you have industry, which includes construction, manufacturing, and the remaining energy extraction sector.
And what's that sitting at?
That sits at around 42.3%. And then at the very bottom, you have agriculture.
Okay, this is the stat that completely stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah, agriculture is practically a rounding error. The data shows it flatlining at less than 0.3% of GDP for years.
Less than 0.3%.
Yeah, basically non-existent.
That is an extreme level of specialization. I'm trying to wrap my head around a society that spends essentially zero time or energy growing its own food.
It's hard to imagine.
We are always taught that a healthy, secure nation needs a foundation of food security. Why is the agriculture stat practically zero, and how is that like a calculated feature rather than a catastrophic bug?
You're hitting on a core economic tension there. The instinct is to say, well, a country must feed itself.
Exactly.
But you have to look at the physical geography. Bahrain is a small island archipelago. The summer temperatures are extreme, the soil is mostly arid, and most importantly, natural freshwater is virtually non-existent.
So trying to force a robust agricultural sector in that environment is basically setting money on fire.
Precisely the problem.
Yes.
Because to grow crops, you need water.
And to get water there, you have to desalinate the ocean.
Exactly. And desalination is incredibly energy intensive. If they wanted to be agriculturally self-sufficient, they would be pouring massive amounts of subsidized energy into desalination plants just to grow basic crops.
Like wheat, corn, tomatoes, that kind of stuff.
Right. Stuff that they can easily purchase on the global market for a fraction of the cost.
So it's the economic principle of comparative advantage playing out in its most extreme form.
Absolutely.
Trying to grow wheat in Bahrain is like trying to mine for gold in an Iowa cornfield. It's a total misallocation of national energy.
That's a great analogy.
They've essentially looked at the map, realized they can't farm, and decided to put all their chips on a high-paying, service-driven day job so they can just buy their groceries from the rest of the world.
That is the exact trade-off. They have traded agricultural self-sufficiency for absolute integration into global supply chains.
Which is a massive risk, honestly.
It is, but for a former resource-dependent state, this is a profound philosophical shift. It requires moving from extracting physical things from the ground to extracting value from human interactions, digital systems, and financial networks.
But if they are abandoning physical self-sufficiency, they need a massive influx of cash to buy the world's goods.
Yes, they do.
So if 53.2% of the economy is services, what kind of services are we actually talking about? Because services is a huge umbrella term.
Yeah.
Are we just talking about luxury tourism, high-end hotels, and restaurants catering to regional visitors?
Well, a portion of it is tourism, certainly, but tourism doesn't generate the kind of structural power needed to replace oil.
Right, that wouldn't be enough.
Exactly. To see the real engine, we have to pivot from the macro view of domestic GDP and look directly at the micro-level breakdown of Bahrain's export structure.
Okay.
This is where we see the phenomenon of extreme openness.
Let's get into the trade data, because the numbers in this section of the report are genuinely hard to process.
They're extreme. The data reveals that Bahrain is a hyper-globalized economy.
How hyper-globalized?
As of 2022, total trade, meaning imports plus exports, accounts for 157% of its gross domestic product.
Okay, let's pause and unpack the math on that, because on the surface it sounds impossible. How can trade be 157% of your GDP?
It does sound weird, yeah.
How can you trade more than your entire economy produces?
It sounds like a paradox until you understand how highly integrated transit, financial, and processing hubs work.
Break it down for us.
GDP measures the final value added within the country's borders. Trade, on the other hand, measures the gross value of goods and services crossing the border.
Okay, give me a tangible example of how that works on the ground.
Sure. Imagine a processing plant in Bahrain. They import $100 worth of raw aluminum.
Okay.
They use their infrastructure to refine it, adding $10 of value, and then they export the finished product for $110. The actual contribution to Bahrain's GDP is only that $10 of value added, but the total trade recorded on the ledgers is $210, the $100 import plus the $110 export.
Ah, I see. So it's a high-throughput system. The money, the data, and the goods are just flowing through the island at an incredible velocity.
Velocity is the perfect word for it. When a country has a trade to GDP ratio well over 100%, it means their domestic economy is essentially a node in a much larger global network.
That makes total sense.
And within that massive trade volume, service trade alone makes up 62.4% of their GDP.
So back to the big question. What are these high-value services that are flowing through this node?
The data highlights a clear dual engine driving the post-oil machine.
What's the first engine?
The first engine is insurance and financial services. They make up a massive 35% of all service exports.
35%.
Because the second engine is communications and computer services, the ICT sector.
Right, the tech side.
Exactly. That has remained an incredibly stable pillar, holding at around 14% of service exports, though it actually spiked as high as 26.4% back in 2011.
Finance and IT. The invisible architecture of the modern world.
Yes, exactly.
It makes total sense when you think about their physical constraints. What do you need to run a global financial hub and a thriving tech sector?
Well, not land, that's for sure.
Exactly. You don't need vast tracts of arable land. You don't need millions of gallons of fresh water to irrigate crops.
Right.
You need fast, reliable internet, a stable legal framework that international banks trust, and incredibly smart, educated people sitting at desks.
You've identified the blueprint perfectly. They built an economy that requires brain power, not physical space.
Wow.
But to support that, you need a digital foundation that is absolutely bulletproof. You cannot be a global communications hub if your internet connectivity is spotty or insecure.
The digital infrastructure data in the report backs that up completely, doesn't it?
The penetration is total. The data shows that internet usage is essentially at 100% of the population.
Which is pretty much the ceiling.
Right. But what's really fascinating is a scatter plot in the data set regarding secure internet servers.
Oh, I saw that chart.
Yeah, if you look at the growth of secure servers per million people from 1990 to 2023, it is an exponential hockey stick growth curve.
So it starts flat and then just launches upward.
It starts flat in the early internet days and then just shoots straight up into the stratosphere.
So they didn't just wire the country for basic consumer browsing. They wired it for secure, high-volume financial transactions and encrypted data processing.
Exactly. They built a digital fortress, they laid the physical fiber optics and the secure server farms to support that 35% financial export engine.
Okay, I see the strategy, and clearly it's working. But I have to play the skeptic here.
Go for it.
They are totally wired, their digital infrastructure is world-class, and their trade is 157% of their GDP. But being that exposed to the global market, being that deeply woven into the global supply chain, doesn't that make them incredibly vulnerable?
Oh, absolutely.
Like if the global financial system catches a cold or if tech stocks crash, doesn't Bahrain get pneumonia?
That is a very astute critique, and it is the inherent risk of their model.
Because they have no domestic buffer.
Right. When your trade exceeds your GDP, you are profoundly sensitive to global demand shocks, supply chain disruptions, and international interest rate fluctuations.
Which we saw in 2020.
We saw exactly that with the cratering of their economy in 2020. However, While economic vulnerability to the outside world is a known risk that they actively try to manage through financial reserves and things like that, the data points to a much more insidious internal risk.
Okay, an internal risk.
Yeah, it's a risk hidden deep within their national accounting.
Wait, hidden how?
Hmm.
What are we missing when we look at that shiny $25,000 GDP per capita
Hmm.
and that massive trade volume?
We are missing the true cost of their wealth.
The true cost.
Traditional GDP tells us how much money is currently flowing through the system, but it doesn't tell us if the country is actually getting wealthier in the long run,
Right.
or if it is just liquidating its underlying physical assets to throw a great party today.
Which brings us to the savings paradox I teased at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Yes. Let's get into this because this concept completely reframes how you evaluate national wealth.
I really want to look at the adjusted net savings data here.
Yeah.
How can a country with wealthy citizens have a negative savings rate?
So the metric is adjusted net savings expressed as a percentage of gross national income.
Okay.
Traditional gross savings just looks at income minus consumption. How much money did you make minus how much you spent?
Simple math.
Right. But the adjusted net savings metric is a far more ruthless and honestly honest form of accounting.
Why is that?
It measures true wealth accumulation by factoring in the depletion of natural resources and the cost of environmental damage.
Okay, I want to make sure everyone grasped how radical this metric is compared to normal GDP. I was trying to think of a good metaphor for this. Let's imagine national wealth as a bathtub.
Okay, I like that.
Traditional GDP is just measuring the water pouring out of the faucet. In Bahrain's case, the faucet is blasting out at full volume, 25 grand per person, 157% trade volume. It looks incredibly impressive.
But adjusted net savings isn't looking at the faucet, it's checking the drain.
Exactly. If the drain at the bottom of the tub, the depleted oil you can never get back, the climate damage, the health costs of pollution, if that drain is wider than the faucet, then the water level in the tub is actually dropping.
Right, the net volume is going down.
The nation is emptying its wealth no matter how fast the water is blasting in at the top.
That bathtub metaphor is perfect. Traditional accounting treats selling non-renewable natural resources as income.
Which is crazy when you think about it.
It is. Adjusted net savings says, no, you didn't create new value, you just sold off a piece of the house.
Yeah.
It deducts the value of the depleted resources from the national savings. And when you apply this strict accounting to Bahrain, the numbers are literally flashing red.
Let's hear the numbers.
In 2017, their adjusted net savings plummeted to negative 19.6% of GNI.
Negative 19.6.
Yeah. And while it has improved somewhat, the data shows it was still sitting at a negative 7.67% as recently as 2022.
So they are operating in the red. The drain is still wider than the faucet. What exactly is pulling that number down so drastically?
The data isolates two main culprits. First, energy depletion. The actual extraction and selling off of the remaining fossil fuels costs the country about 1.6% of their GNI annually.
Okay, that's the oil.
Right. But the bigger shock is the environmental cost. Carbon dioxide, or CO2 damage, costs a staggering 4.1% of GNI.
Wait, over 4% of their entire national income is erased by the cost of carbon damage?
Yeah, 4.1%.
That is an immense invisible tax on their economy.
It is, and it aligns with the physical environmental metrics in the report, which, quite frankly, paint a very grim picture.
What are those metrics?
Well, total greenhouse gas emissions are rising sharply. In 2019, they hit 37.7 million tons of CO2 equivalent.
And we have to remember the geography here. This isn't a massive continent where emissions can just sort of disperse.
Right. It's not like the US or Australia.
This is a small island archipelago. The impact of those emissions, the urban heat island effect, the local air quality, it's highly concentrated.
Highly concentrated, and it puts immense stress on their most fragile resource.
The water.
Exactly. Remember our discussion about agriculture and water? The environmental pressure isn't just in the air, it's in the aquifers.
Oh, wow.
The data shows that Bahrain's renewable freshwater resources are critically low. In fact, they are practically a mathematical illusion.
What do you mean by that?
They're fixed at roughly 0.0004 billion cubic meters. They have almost zero natural buffer against climate shifts.
This brings up a massive friction point for me, just thinking through the logistics of their economy.
What's that?
We talked about how they pivoted to finance and IT, the dual engine. And we talked about the hockey stick growth of secure internet servers.
Right, the digital fortress.
But data centers run extremely hot. They require massive, massive amounts of electricity to run, and usually millions of gallons of water to cool.
Yep.
If they have no fresh water, how are they running a digital fortress?
It creates a vicious feedback loop of environmental strain. Because they lack natural fresh water, they have to rely on desalination to provide water for both the population and the cooling systems of their tech infrastructure. Desalination requires burning fossil fuels or using massive amounts of grid electricity.
Which generates emissions.
Exactly. Generating that electricity creates the 37.7 million tons of CO2 emissions. Those emissions cause the climate damage that erodes 4.1% of their GNI.
It's an Ouroboros.
A snake eating its own tail.
The very tech sector that is supposed to save them from oil dependence requires so much energy and water that it forces them to keep burning the oil and draining their adjusted net savings.
It proves that the transition is incomplete. The legacy of the extraction economy still casts a heavy shadow over their national balance sheet.
So the wealth is kind of an illusion.
Well, they are generating high current income, but the underlying physical capital of the nation, the fossil fuels, the clean air, the water, is being depleted or damaged faster than they are saving money.
Okay, if the natural resources are bleeding out and the environment is under severe pressure, what is Bahrain replacing that physical capital with?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Right. If the oil runs dry, the water is gone, and the net savings are negative, what is their long-term survival strategy? What is going to break them out of that feedback loop?
To find that answer, we have to flip to the human side of the report.
Okay.
They aren't trying to replace physical capital with more physical capital. They have realized that the only infinite resource they have left is human brainpower.
So we need to look at the demographic engine.
Exactly.
Demographics are destiny. I mean, this is where the structural planning of the country really comes into focus. What does the population structure look like right now?
Bahrain has engineered a highly favorable, almost perfectly optimized demographic profile.
How so?
Currently, an incredible 77.4% of the population sits in the working age bracket.
Which is defined as what, 15 to 64?
Yes, 15 to 64 years old.
Over 3/4 of the entire country is of working age. That is a massive concentrated labor pool.
It's what economists call a demographic dividend. This is a golden window for a nation's development.
Right.
When the vast majority of your population is economically productive, it means you have very few dependents to support relative to the number of people generating wealth.
Let's look at those dependency ratios because they really tell the story of the burden or lack thereof on that workforce.
Sure. The youth dependency ratio, which measures the proportion of the population under 15 compared to the working age population, has plummeted to around 26%.
Okay, so there isn't a massive, overwhelming wave of children requiring primary care, new schools, and pediatric health resources without producing economic value.
Right. And at the other end of the spectrum, the old age dependency ratio, those over 65, is currently sitting at an incredibly low 3.9%.
Wait, only 3.9% of the population is elderly.
Just 3.9%.
That is wild. When you look at Western Europe or Japan right now, their economies are just being crushed by the healthcare and pension burdens of an aging population.
Yeah, it's a huge crisis for them.
But in Bahrain, those costs are practically non-existent. For every one elderly person requiring care, there is an absolute army of working-age individuals generating taxable income.
It is the perfect demographic setup for rapid economic expansion. You maximize production and you minimize social support costs.
But looking at the timeline in the report, I see a tension here.
What do you see?
That 3.9% old age dependency ratio is low, but the trend line is creeping upward. Slowly, sure, but it's rising.
And that is the ticking clock.
Yeah.
The demographic dividend is not a permanent state. It is a temporary window, and that window eventually closes.
Because everyone gets older.
The population will age. The trend line proves that Bahrain is racing against time. They have to get rich, structurally and sustainably rich, before they get old.
And the way you get sustainably rich in a service economy is by ensuring that those 77.4% of working-age people aren't just doing manual labor or, low-tier administrative work.
They need to be highly skilled to compete globally.
Which brings us to the educational data. The level of investment here seems incredibly aggressive.
Aggressive is an understatement. Bahrain clearly understands the concept of human capital theory, the idea that investing in the education and skills of your population yields a direct economic return.
What are the metrics on that?
The metrics are phenomenal. Primary school gross enrollment is consistently over 100%.
Meaning virtually every child of primary age, plus some outside the standard age bracket, is enrolled.
Yes. And youth literacy is near 100%.
Those are great baselines, but the stat that really caught my eye, the one that indicates the quality of the investment, is the secondary school pupil-to-teacher ratio.
Oh, yeah. That one is incredible.
The data says it's optimized down to 10.2 to 1.
Yes. 10.2 students for every single teacher at the secondary level.
I want you to think about your own high school experience for a second. Imagine having one teacher for every 10 kids in your calculus or chemistry class.
It changes the whole dynamic, right?
The level of personalized instruction,
Mhm.
the lack of overcrowding, the ability for a teacher to truly mentor and identify the strengths of individual students, that is a staggering luxury.
It really is.
There are elite private schools in the West that charge $50,000 a year that don't have a 10.2 to 1 ratio.
And consider the macroeconomic cost of that. When a state maintains a ratio that low across its public education system, it means they are paying a massive salary bill to maintain an enormous teaching workforce. It is an astronomical financial commitment. It proves that the government isn't just paying lip service to the post-oil transition. They are systematically pouring their remaining wealth directly into the brains of their youth.
Okay, so we have a massive working age population, and the state is spending heavily to ensure they receive a highly personalized, elite-level secondary education.
Right.
But here is the question that basically turns this entire deep dive on its head.
Or
When you look at the outcomes of this massive educational investment, who exactly is benefiting the most?
yeah, this is the turning point.
Who is rising to the top of this hyper-optimized system?
The answer to that question contains perhaps the most disruptive and fascinating data point in the entire 60-year report.
Break it down for us.
Because when you look at who is driving the high-end educational outcomes and who is subsequently filling the ranks of the new high-value service economy, it completely shatters the regional narrative.
We are talking about the gender revolution in Bahrain. Lay the numbers on me.
Let's look at the Gender Parity Index, or GPI, in higher education. A GPI of 1.0 means exact equality. So, an equal number of men and women enrolled in universities.
Got it.
A number below 1.0 means more men. A number above 1.0 means more women. Historically, in many developing nations, a major struggle for decades is just trying to get the GPI to approach 1.0.
Right. The United Nations Global Development Goals are usually focused just on achieving basic parity, getting girls into the classroom at the same rate as boys.
Bahrain's GPI in higher education hasn't just reached parity, it has hit a massive 1.72.
Wait, 1.72. Let's stop right there.
Yes.
This means female enrollment doesn't just equal male enrollment. It vastly, overwhelmingly exceeds it.
For every 100 men sitting in a university lecture hall in Bahrain, there are 172 women.
That is what sociologists call a reverse gender gap. And at 1.72, it's an extreme one.
It really is.
The female population has completely leapfrogged the male population in academic attainment. But how does that actually happen?
It's a great question.
Did the government mandate this? Or is this a cultural shift? What are the men doing if they aren't in university?
It's a complex mix of cultural evolution and economic structure.
Okay.
In many Gulf states, men have historically had guaranteed access to lucrative, stable careers in the military, the police force, or the state-run oil and heavy industry sectors.
Right. Sectors that don't always require advanced university degrees.
Exactly. Women, on the other hand, were largely excluded from those traditional physical labor or security-based pipelines.
Ah. So if a woman wanted to achieve economic independence and status, the only viable path forward was through extreme academic excellence.
Precisely. They recognized that the emerging sectors, finance, IT, healthcare, education, were meritocratic and required degrees.
That makes total sense.
So women disproportionately utilized the state's massive investment in education to build their own economic foundation.
Wow.
And the data shows this isn't just about getting a degree for social status. It translates directly and powerfully into the labor market.
Give me the labor data, because this is where the rubber meets the road.
When we look at the workforce, women are overwhelmingly represented in the high-value sectors. An astonishing 91.3% of all employed women in Bahrain are working in the service sector.
Let's connect the dots here, because this is where the entire architectural blueprint of Bahrain's future becomes incredibly clear.
Yeah, it all comes together.
If we look back at our earlier discussion, the dual engine replacing oil is insurance, finance, and IT.
Right.
Those are all tertiary service sectors. And the data here shows that women are the ones dominating higher education, and 91% of employed women are moving directly into that service sector.
The conclusion is undeniable. If the service sector is the cornerstone of the post-oil transition and women are dominating the educational pathways that feed that sector,
Then women are effectively the cornerstone of Bahrain's entire future economic model.
the transition away from oil is resting on their shoulders.
Looking at this data, it completely rewrites the Western narrative.
It really does.
If you read international headlines, there is a very standard, often condescending assumption about gender roles and female economic participation in the Middle East.
A huge bias, yeah.
But you look at the hard data from this report, and the service-driven future of this country is undeniably female. In the corporate and tech sectors, we are looking at the emergence of a technocratic matriarchy.
It highlights the absolute danger of relying on regional stereotypes rather than national data.
Absolutely.
Bahrain has cultivated a uniquely highly educated female workforce because the math of their survival demanded it.
Because they didn't have the resources to do otherwise.
Right. They recognize that a service economy, particularly a hyper-competitive global financial node, cannot function without mobilizing 100% of its potential brainpower.
You can't leave half your talent on the bench when human capital is your only remaining resource.
Exactly.
But wait, this brings up another major friction point.
What's that?
For a highly educated, deeply integrated financial and IT workforce to actually thrive, they need more than just degrees and ambition. They need stability.
That's true.
International finance doesn't flow into a country, and tech companies don't build secure servers there unless the environment is incredibly predictable.
Yes.
So what does the data say about how the country is actually run? What is the operating system of Bahrain that keeps this complex, fast-moving machine from breaking down?
To understand the operating system, we need to transition into the final major data segment of our report.
Okay, lay it on us.
We're looking at the institutional framework and quality of life indicators. Economists and international investors use a standard global metric for this called the Worldwide Governance Indicators, or WGI.
The governance matrix. Now, as a rule on this show, we look at this data entirely neutrally.
Of course.
We are analyzing the numbers to understand the structural, mechanical realities of the country, not to endorse a specific political ideology. So, impartially speaking, what does the WGI radar chart look like for Bahrain?
It shows a deeply fascinating, highly asymmetrical profile.
Asymmetrical how?
Well, the WGI tracks several dimensions of governance. Let's look at three key ones that dictate the economic environment. First, regulatory quality.
Okay.
Bahrain is highly competitive here, ranking in the 63.9th percentile globally.
What does that mean in practical terms?
This metric means the government is highly effective at formulating and implementing sound policies and regulations that permit and promote private sector development.
Okay, so the rules of business are clear, effective, and modern. What's the next metric?
Second, the rule of law. This metric captures confidence in the rules of society, including property rights, the quality of contract enforcement, and the courts.
Where do they sit there?
Bahrain sits steadily around the 54.7th percentile. It's a stable mid to high tier ranking. It means if a foreign bank signs a contract in Bahrain, they can trust the courts to enforce it.
High regulatory quality, stable rule of law. That sounds like exactly the pitch a country makes to attract foreign direct investment.
It is the exact pitch.
But you said the profile was asymmetrical. Where is the drop-off?
The asymmetry appears sharply in the metric called voice and accountability.
Okay, what does that measure?
This measures the extent to which citizens are able to participate in selecting their government, as well as freedom of expression and freedom of association.
And their ranking.
In this metric, Bahrain ranks quite low, sitting around the 11.12th percentile globally.
Let's ground those percentiles in reality. If you were looking at a radar chart of these governance indicators, it wouldn't be a perfect balanced circle.
No, not at all.
It stretches way out on the axis of business regulation, market rules, and legal stability, but it pulls way, way back on the axis of broad public accountability and democratic participation. Practically speaking, What does that look like on the ground?
Practically, it means you can fly into Bahrain, register an international IT corporation in 24 hours with ironclad legal protections and transparent tax structures.
Right.
But you cannot organize a massive public protest in the town square about the zoning laws where that corporation is being built.
Wow. Okay.
The data paints a picture of a technocratic, highly centralized administrative state. The state prioritizes economic modernization, business efficiency, and strict legal predictability over broad political friction.
It's a highly engineered societal model. It's a calculated trade-off.
It is entirely calculated because when you consider foreign direct investment, which Bahrain desperately needs to fuel its IT and finance sectors, what do global corporations actually look for?
They want stability.
Exactly. Broad political debate often looks like instability to a foreign investor. High regulatory quality and extreme physical safety are the ultimate magnets for global capital.
And speaking of physical safety, we can't ignore the societal outcomes in the data. Because whatever one might think of the governance model, the actual health and safety metrics of the population are incredible.
The safety and health outcomes are stellar. Let's look at infant mortality,
Okay.
which, by the way, is widely considered one of the best proxy indicators for the overall quality and accessibility of a nation's healthcare system.
Right, it's a huge benchmark.
It has dropped to a historic low of 7.2 per 1,000 live births.
That's a massive achievement. And from a public safety standpoint,
Intentional homicides are virtually non-existent in Bahrain, tracking at less than 1 per 100,000 people.
less than 1 in 100,000. That is fundamentally a zero-crime environment in terms of violent crime.
Yes. The state has engineered an incredibly safe, stable, and highly regulated environment. And tying it all back to the economy, this is a strategic necessity.
How so?
To attract top-tier global talent and to convince massive financial institutions to route billions of dollars through your secure servers, you have to guarantee that the power stays on, the streets are impeccably safe for expatriates and citizens alike, and the business regulations will not change arbitrarily due to political gridlock.
So the governance model, the low voice and accountability paired with high regulation and near zero crime, is essentially a feature, not a bug, of their economic strategy.
That is exactly what the synthesis of the data implies.
It is the heavy anchor that allows them to maintain that 157% trade openness without the society flying apart from the centrifugal force of globalization.
The centralized governance structure allows for long-term, uninterrupted economic planning. They can execute a massive pivot to services, heavily fund a 10.2 teacher ratio, and foster a female-driven higher education boom, all without the volatility of election cycle reversals.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have.
We've looked at the macro economy's $25,000 GDP, the extreme global openness, and the dual engine of finance and IT.
Right.
We've examined the stark environmental reality of practically zero fresh water and the negative savings paradox.
Which is still a huge hurdle.
We've explored the demographics, the female-driven human capital boom, and finally, the strict technocratic governance matrix that holds it all together. It is time to pull all these threads together.
Let's do it.
When you look at the synthesis of all this data, the 2030 vision of Bahrain, where is this island steering to the future?
If we synthesize the entire 60-year data set, Bahrain's future survival relies on successfully managing a three-pronged reality.
Okay, what is number one?
Number one is de-oiling. The service sector, specifically finance and ICT, is now the absolute core engine of the economy.
Right, we established that.
But they must urgently solve the negative net savings rate. They have to figure out how to generate that wealth without the environmental drain of CO2 and energy depletion dragging them into the red. They have to plug the drain in the bathtub.
The wealth generation has to completely decouple from the environmental degradation. What's number two?
Number two is talent-driven growth. Their greatest renewable resource isn't in the ground, it's in their university lecture halls.
The human capital.
Exactly. The highly educated, predominantly female service workforce is the foundation of their future. They have to continue to leverage that 1.72 gender parity index, ensuring that female educational dominance translates into high-value corporate leadership and innovation.
And number three?
Number three is governance leverage. Their highly engineered, strict, high-quality regulatory environment is the anchor. As long as they maintain that stability, predictability, and physical safety, foreign direct investment will continue to view them as a safe harbor in a volatile region.
It really is a masterclass in adaptation. They looked at a map, realized they had no water and fading oil reserves, and decided to build a digital and financial fortress powered almost entirely by the brains of their own people.
It is a successful transition, but an ongoing one. The data shows they have survived the initial, most dangerous phase of life after oil, but the environmental costs and the ticking demographic clock mean the work is far from over.
Which brings me to a final thought. I want to sincerely thank you, the listener, for sharing such a brilliant, friction-filled, and genuinely eye-opening stack of data with us
It
today.
was a great set of sources.
We've seen how Bahrain is essentially trading its finite physical resources for infinite human capital specifically by intensely educating its youth and its women to build this service-driven powerhouse. But here is a provocative thought for you to mull over on your own as you digest this deep dive. Bahrain has built its entire survival strategy around human-delivered services, right? Insurance, finance, information technology.
Yeah, that's the whole engine.
They have optimized their entire society to produce the smartest humans to sit at those desks. But we are currently standing on the edge of the global AI revolution.
Oh, wow.
As artificial intelligence begins to automate the exact financial analysis, coding, and IT services that Bahrain has built its whole future around, will their massive investment in human capital be enough to pivot a second time?
It's the ultimate existential question for a service economy. If algorithms replace the financial analysts and the coders, what happens to that female-driven economic engine they spent 60 years building?
Does the transition away from oil ever truly end? Or do you just trade the vulnerability of a physical commodity for the vulnerability of a digital one? Keep digging into the data, keep questioning the simple stereotypes, and above all, stay insanely curious. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.